The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Students of the Game. My name is Alex Baumann, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nathan Glidewell. Week 0 has come and gone, so we're going to recap what happened there, then go into a little bit of detail of what's going to happen with the 12-team playoff and our predictions and all that type of stuff. So, Nathan, let's start off with Georgia Tech versus Florida State and what happened there. Upset in Ireland. Georgia Tech beats number 10 Florida State 24-21. I don't think a lot of people were expecting this. If you watch the College Game Day, I believe the only person to predict Georgia Tech to win was the guest guy, Seamus. So that's a little bit of a funny thing there with Nick Saban on his first ever College Game Day as a full-time co-host or everyone, or I don't know how you specify him, or a member. He gets it wrong, so that's a little bit funny there. But Nathan, what were your thoughts on what happened in this Georgia Tech game with him getting a walk-off field goal win?
Yeah, I don't think we gave Georgia Tech enough credit for what they did in the offseason and really improving their offensive line. And I don't think we gave enough credit to Haynes King and the job he did last season, especially with the number of issues they had on the defensive end. But Georgia Tech really cleaned up, really improved a lot in recruiting, and they brought a lot of new guys in through the transfer portal. And I don't think we paid enough attention to them. But another thing, I think that Florida State, coming off of last year, I don't think we paid enough attention to how much they lost in key spots, especially that defensive line. I think it struggled a lot. And obviously on the offensive end, I think people thought DJ Uiagalelei was going to be more of a factor in what they were able to do offensively, and it ended up not working out that way. They struggled to move the ball downfield other than really the first drive where, I mean, it was scripted and they just were able to move the ball at will and got down the field and they scored. And then after that, they just kind of looked flat in areas and they weren't really able to throw the ball. I like the running somewhat from Florida State. I thought Roydell Williams had a pretty good game, especially when you tie him into being a receiving back. But obviously that wasn't enough. That wasn't versatile enough to move the Florida State offense. I think Florida State's offensive line did pretty good for the most part. Gave up a few sacks here and there, but for the most part, it was just Uiagalelei not reading the defense right or not making the right decision. And that really just had every single Florida State drive, especially in the second half, just stall out. In a game against this Georgia Tech team who I think Brent Key did a really good job coaching up this summer, and especially in this first game, you can't afford to have dead drives like that. But a lot of credit goes to Haynes King and what he was able to do. Really just improvise in certain areas. His receivers did a fantastic job. They ran the ball decently. I think that's one thing they probably should improve on. Defense got stops when they needed to. Didn't give up big plays. I thought Georgia Tech did a fantastic job, and they took care of business against a top 10 team. And to have that be the opening key win for the Georgia Tech team, it really makes you look at the big picture here for the ACC and say, how many games can Georgia Tech go and win? Are they a dark horse to go and be in the conference championship now? Or what does Florida State need to improve on? Are they dead in the water? Is their season pretty much over before it even starts? And I think we'll probably dive into that here in a little bit. But just looking at this game in total, I think it surprised just a lot of people just because of where Florida State was last year and Georgia Tech not really being known for having this type of offense, firepower, or anything like that. So this was definitely a huge surprise.
Georgia Tech did a really good job dominating the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football. You kind of talked about it, Nathan, with the running game from Georgia Tech. Haynes King, 54 yards on the ground. Jamal Haynes, the running back, had 75 yards. And it just felt like every time they ran the ball, about every time they ran the ball, there was an open lane for somebody to go through. And a credit to Brent Key, former offensive line coach. He knows how to coach those guys up. The offensive line coach there at Georgia Tech has done an amazing job as well. The defense was much improved from last year. If you look at the stats for Georgia Tech's defense last year, it was in the toilet. Their offense was pretty good, outside of Haynes King throwing the most interceptions in the ACC, but they moved the ball fairly well for a Georgia Tech team. But their defense was horrid. and they bring in a former Duke defensive coordinator to Georgia Tech, and you saw the immense changes to that unit. A lot of pass rush, height, their defensive end. Felt like every play they were calling his name out, and he was all over the place. So that's a name I would look out for going into the rest of the season is Height at Georgia Tech. He could have a monster year, especially the way he played. But for Florida State, DJ Uiagalelei, that was one of the worst performances I've ever seen at quarterback, especially for a number 10 Florida State team. I mean, you look at his stats, 13 of his 19 completions were throwing 5 yards or less down the field. So glorified check down artist for DJU. You're not going to win a football game throwing check downs every play. I'm sorry. You won't beat a New Mexico team doing that. And that just goes to DJU not reading the defense well and Mike Norvell not putting him in the best position to succeed, if you want to say that. But DJU, I think it's been proven at the last 3 colleges he's been to now. He's not a 5-star quarterback anymore. I don't see the NFL in his future realistically the way he's been playing. I know it's one game and we're beating him down after this one bad performance, but it just feels like every time he plays a fairly good opponent, he doesn't perform up to the standards. And Mike Norvell has a lot of question marks here with what he's going to do with DJU. Is he going to stick with this guy? Is he going to move on to another quarterback? Because if DJU cannot push the ball down the field, this team is not going to be able to succeed. You can't just run the ball and expect teams not to stack the box against you. And when they do, if you try to pass the ball to the stack box and you're throwing checkdowns, so that's not going to work either. And you talked about it a little bit, Nathan, with the Florida State defense losing a lot on the defensive line. They lost Jared Verse and then Braden Fisk. The defensive line really did get dominated. Patrick Payton felt like he was a non-factor at times, and he's supposed to be this team's dominant pass rusher. So that defense has got to play a lot better than it did. But then talking about the receiving core for Florida State, you lose 2 guys, and you don't really bring anybody in to replace them. You brought in Malik Benson, but when he's running open down the field and DJU's throwing a 2-yard check down to the running back, I mean, what's the point of going out and getting Malik Benson if you're just going to throw a check down after check down? So, like I said, Florida State has to go back to the drawing board because you cannot be throwing check down after check down and trying to run the football every play because teams are going to stack the box and you're not going to be able to succeed. So Mike Norvell has a lot to work out in the future, but I don't think their season is over yet. It's one game. It's 12-team playoff. There's a lot of season left. If this is the 14 playoff, yeah, their season's basically over. I don't think there's a way you can come back from this, but 12-team, it's still wide open. If they get back to the board and they find something out that DJU is going to be better or something, then kudos to them.
Yeah, I think that's just like a necessary overreaction. Everyone needs to have that one overreaction. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the real meat of college football yet. We haven't even started week 1. This is just the week 0 game. So to have that overreaction, get out of the way. I'm sure there will be more as week 1 progresses. But I think this was a necessary reaction for a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, football is back. College football is back. Let's go ahead and throw some hot takes around." But obviously, with the 12-team playoff, there you can make a mistake. You can have a mulligan. But Florida State, they're using that in the first game of the year. It doesn't look too good. I do want to give a shout out to Georgia Tech's linebacker, number 44. Everywhere. He was everywhere. I mean, he reminded me of Reuben Foster, the way he was hitting people. He had the back pad and everything. Insane to watch him play. I love the tenacity and the hustle he played with. So I just wanted to give him a shout out because I really enjoyed watching him play. But with Mike Norvell and what he did last season, obviously he has a clue what he's doing. I think they will go back, especially this week, and kind of readjust how they do things on the offensive end. Try to make things easier on DJ, make it easier for him to perform. I don't know what
shouldn't have to. Really shouldn't have to. He's a senior.
It looked like an easy script for him anyway. The way that they were calling plays, but it's like he was scared to make certain throws. And I know it rained a little bit in the game, but that shouldn't have really been that big of a factor. And so I don't know what the whole problem was with DJ, and especially going back to last year. I didn't see any problems with some of the reads he made. I mean, he was able to improvise a lot better, and he just comes out in this game and he looks like back to his Clemson days. I didn't understand the whole issue. And And as far as the receiving core goes, it's not great. I'm gonna go ahead and start that off by saying that I understand why they're running the ball a lot more. You lose a guy in Cam Coleman. I mean,
Keon
Keon Coleman. Sorry, I'm
and
thinking about
Johnny Wilson
Auburn.
too.
Yeah, Johnny Wilson. Yeah. So you have a lot of issues with that. So it's not going to be this one thing that they were going to be able to instantly replace through the transfer portal. I mean, going out in William Benson, that's one guy who really has been unproven thus far. He had a decent game. He was able to get open when he needed to, but the only problem is DJ couldn't make the passes he needed to win the game. And as far as the defensive effort goes, it needs to be better. Georgia Tech has a pretty good offense, but the number of star players Florida State has on that defense, even with the guys they lost last year, it's pretty unacceptable for them to and just get dominated on the line of scrimmage like they did. And with Patrick Payton, man, he needs to be better. He was supposed to be the leader of that defense, and he came out flat.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he was a non-factor. It felt like they had just taken him out of the game completely, which I think goes to the credit of Brent Key and that offensive line for doing that, taking such a good player out of the game and making him ineffective. So it's not all on Patrick Payton because Brent Key did an amazing job and his staff preparing for this game. And I feel like Florida State didn't do as well as a job preparing for Georgia Tech. Talking about some other games that happened this weekend, Montana State scored 21 unanswered points to stun New Mexico 35-31. New Mexico had a 17-0 lead to start the game, but the Bobcats from Montana State ran for 362 yards. And I don't know if you saw the clip on Twitter or X, Nathan, but they had one where it was like 94 yards to the house towards the end of the game.
Yeah, that's an insane amount of rushing yards. I mean, that's just saying we're gonna tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna run the ball every play until you stop it. And obviously, New Mexico could not figure out how to stop it. So credit to Montana State. But how do you open up a game 17-0 and just absolutely? I mean, the tires fell off everything. That's just awful.
Do you think this game is an indication that the lower tier FBS schools are closer to FCS schools than they are to the upper tier and even mid-tier FBS schools, Nathan?
I would say that the competition at the FCS level has improved a bunch. You look at the top rated FCS schools, I think they really could compete in some of these conferences, maybe like the American Conference USA, Sun Belt. You look at those, and I think that these top tier FCS teams can definitely go out and compete. I mean, I think it just shows the talent level, and how NIL has also affected at the FCS level, and the number of players that go and have great opportunities there. And, some of those players end up going to the NFL. I know it's surprising, and it's not like a huge number or anything, but they do have very, very talented teams, and they should, be given that respect. And Montana State obviously showed that they deserve respect.
So, like, sort of sticking on this point here with the FBS and FCS, do you think we're moving in a direction where we're going to have lower tier FBS schools like New Mexico sort of phased out of the FBS, and we're going to move into this mega conferences model where you have the best of the best playing like the Oregons, the Alabama, the Georgia, the Ohio States, and it's just going to be them and these other lower tier schools are going to have no place anymore?
Yeah, I don't want it to be like that. I don't want to say it's like that. But then again, I look at the big picture and where everything's been moving, and it's kind of like this inevitable feeling that only the best of the best teams will be in these power conferences, and the teams that really don't have a lot of success will end up being phased out. Whether that be to smaller conferences that really don't see as many bids to the playoff or anything like that, which is sad to see because I think you look at college football in the landscape and it's more of the idea of every single team can compete. It's not down to just a select few. And now the direction we've been moving in, especially with the 12-team playoff, it's really just about these power conferences dominating the sport, which then again you can't really blame them because of the way they've handled things. I just hate the way that college football is going to turn into the NFL, and I think it will continue to go that way. I mean, we'll end up probably having replicates of like the AFC and the NFC eventually, with your power conferences, as you talked about, the power two. You look at the Big Ten, you look at the SEC. I mean, the amount of people that they brought in, the big teams, the revenue that they make. So obviously that's just the direction we're heading. And I hate to say it, but that's just what college football is going to end up being. It's being controlled by money. And if, I mean, when did NIL first get reinstated or come back out?
Had to be like
Yeah.
2016. No, it can be 2016. That was in the
No,
playoff.
that was way too early. I
Had to
don't know.
be like 2020 or something like that. COVID
Yeah,
prior to that, something like that. But
yeah,
it was feels like it was forever ago at this point.
yeah. When that first happened, everyone was excited because of the things that came with it. But now you look at where we are with NIL, and it's just this crazy, uncontrollable monster that the NCAA really has no power over. And until someone can control what NIL is right now and add restrictions and kind of control how these teams manage um, bringing in certain players and really paying them, this is, I mean, it's going to look like the NFL. And that's an unfortunate thing because I, for one, appreciate college football way more than the NFL because of the way it is.
Are you sure it's not
More,
because the Saints are bad?
I mean, that's part of it. No one wants to sit down and watch the Saints and Derek Carr, but that's a different reason. But there's so much tradition behind college football, and I don't want that to be lost in the fact that NIL has been in place. I mean, I think back to the days where you would see a guy commit to a school and they'd be there for all 4 years and they wouldn't transfer, and you knew who you had on your roster that next season. You knew who was coming back. And now it's just like every season you're scrolling through Twitter, updating, seeing who's going to hit the transfer portal, who you're going to lose.
Even recruiting's that way. You commit
Yeah,
somewhere, and then 3 days later, oh, I'm flipping my commitment to this team.
yeah, Antonio Coleman. Um, yeah, it's kind of just it leaves a bad taste in my mouth to even talk about this. But that's just the state of college football right now. But we'll see how this season goes. I mean, I think we're all excited about the 12-team playoff, but it really will be. It will tell the whole story once we finish the season and look how recruiting is and how the transfer portal is. Because if it keeps getting worse, then I mean, obviously this is going to be the direction we're headed.
Yeah, we're heading in this direction just due to the NIL. I mean, you can put a cap on it. You can say $20 million. That's how much schools have to spend on athletes. But you cannot expect a school like New Mexico to somehow figure out to spend
Yeah,
$20
how
million,
are they going to get that?
compete with Georgia, who will easily get the $20 million. There's you can put a cap on it, but there's no way these smaller schools are going to be able to get that sort of salary to give these players. There's just no way for them to compete. So I think we will get to the point where these New Mexicos, these Mountain West teams that aren't doing so hot, the Hawaiis, are not going to be part of this FBS anymore. We're going to move into a model where it is 2 or 3 mega conferences, whether it's the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, or Big Ten, SEC, ACC, or there's 3 new conferences they form somehow. I don't know, but these schools, lower tier FBS schools, just have no way to compete in this new landscape when it comes to money. They don't have the donors to give them the money to spend on these athletes, and they will eventually be phased out. As sad as that is to say, there's no sugarcoating it. These teams will
Yeah.
not have a place in the future of college football, but there will be a lot of indications this season of how these non-power 4 programs are going to do. Can they compete in this 12-team format? Can the non-power 5 team that makes it the conference champion of that conference compete or win a game in the playoff? Or is it like last season where Liberty gets beat 45-3 by Oregon? And if it's like that, then I think that accelerates it even faster than what it already is now, where we might be next season, where these teams are starting to get phased out a lot quicker than we expect. We might see a chance where it's only the top 4 team conference winners that are guaranteed a spot, and the non-power 4 is sort of pushed to the wayside. Maybe you get a 12-0 non-power 4 team somehow sneak in there, like a Liberty or a Memphis or something like that in the future. But if they don't compete this season, there's a lot of implications going forward. So a lot riding for these non-power 4 teams going forward. So we got some other games, Nathan. You had SMU and their quarterback Preston Stone found RJ Maryland for a 35-yard touchdown pass with a minute 18 left to avoid an upset and beat Nevada 29-24. There was a lot of hype around SMU going into this season, Nathan, but they barely defeat a Nevada team that's not expected to do a whole lot in the Mountain West. Is SMU a fraudulent team in the ACC, or was this just first game jitters trying to feel each other out?
I'm gonna attribute it first game jitters. I think SMU has a very talented roster. I don't think they're gonna be able to really compete in the ACC. I think they have a little ways to go before they start doing that. But they are very talented, and to play a Nevada team this close, I think Nevada really just came out and punched them in the mouth, and they didn't know how to respond. But it shows a lot of I what's the word I'm looking for? I guess SMU coming out and being able to come from behind and seal the victory, it instills a lot of faith in your team and showing that they can go through adversity and come out on top. Nevada is not a completely terrible team. They do have talented people, but SMU really should not have been this close against them. And I think it's more of we're coming out in the first week and we forget how to play football. And that's what I'm going to attribute it to. And maybe FSU was like that. Who knows? But I'm going to give SMU a little bit of a break, new conference and all that. But Nevada was very close to finishing it. I really didn't think this game was going to be this close. I didn't expect it to be like super high scoring either, but for it to be 29-24, SMU fans, they got a little bit of a scare.
I think a lot of these losses are attributed to the transfer portal and these players trying to feel each other out and sort of build chemistry. And that's starting game one. And when you talked about how you really knew who was going to be on your roster year to year, and you don't know who's going to be on your roster now year to year, you just have to build chemistry with these new guys. And that's what happened to the SMUs, the Florida States, is they were sort of feeling each other out, trying to figure out how they mesh together, what the chemistry is. And that's kind of the reason behind, I think, these close games and this loss for the FSU. Sorry.
Yeah.
Before we get into the college football playoff, Nathan, I do have some unfortunate news for you. Fan or show favorite Tony Muskett did lose the starting quarterback battle at Virginia, so no more Muskett.
Tony Muskett.
I know we're going to miss him at Virginia. He will not be starting unless their new starting quarterback, Anthony Colandera, gets hurt.
Or maybe he can prove it in practices that he's better. Well, let's have faith in Tony here.
Tony Muskett, yeah. So talking about the 12-team playoff, the College Game Day did their predictions for what their 12-team playoff looks like. Nathan, you will probably disagree with a lot of what you saw there, especially Kirk Herbstreit's. I know you didn't have a big fan of Kirk and what he put on his board, but who do you think is your 12-team playoff right now?
Gosh, that's hard to go off of. I think that Georgia. Let's go ahead and include all these teams in here. Georgia. Do you want me to skip the obvious teams who will probably end up being in there?
Let's do it this way. Let's do the top 4 conference champions you have.
Well, let's see. I think I ended up having Ohio State or Oregon out of the Big Ten. I had Arizona coming out of the Big 12, and I had. Gosh, I think I had Florida State coming out of the ACC, which doesn't look great now. So maybe I should actually start.
There's still hope for them.
Yeah,
we touched on it. There's still hope. It's not over.
I also did have Virginia taking that Ohio game, and then I had Alabama win the SEC. So those 4 will be in there. Georgia will find its way in there. I think there is a good chance Ole Miss can end up finding their way in there with the schedule they have. Gosh, there's a lot of different teams. Utah can make a great argument to end up getting in there. We talked about dark horse teams, and we focused on this a few weeks ago and narrowed down a few of the dark horse teams. Could Georgia Tech possibly be a dark horse team?
I don't want to overreact. I don't want to overreact to that. Haynes King did not look particularly well throwing the football in that game. I know he had a few good throws, but
his decision making was better though.
It was better.
He didn't throw any interceptions or anything like that. So yeah, we can we'll put a pin in it for Georgia Tech. I think Virginia Tech. mean, maybe. I don't think anyone else is really that high on him as I am. And
Kirk
you're
was. I think it was Kirk who had him in his 4.
Yeah, that was like the one thing he might have, yeah. I don't know. Some of these predictions that were made, I go back to I think the 2020 season or 2021 season that Desmond Howard came out with. Well, it was like Pitt, Texas A&M, Michigan, and Baylor, and
Yes.
none of them ended up making it. Uh, yeah, it was kind of like that. Gosh, I think about a lot of different teams from the SEC. Could LSU have enough firepower to make it? I think they have a little bit of a tough schedule, and especially with Garrett Nussmeier just coming into the starting job. They also out in the offensive end. Their defense needs to improve a lot from where they were last year. So I kind of want to fade them. Missouri, losing Cody Schrader, I worry about their running. I worry about Brady Cook and his decision making at points. And are they going to be one dimensional, only target Luther Burden? People are going to key on that. Is their defense good enough to compete? I don't know. You can think about Tennessee maybe. Can Nico come out and have a stellar season? Could Jane Spears absolutely just take over and Tennessee look like a really, really good team like they were back in 2022? A lot of questions with them. I don't know if I'd throw them in just yet, but maybe they're recruiting well, so maybe next year. Um, I I think Texas will probably end up making it, but I don't know.
They
Uh,
should.
they should with what they have, but I mean they had tough games. There's tough games all around. You look at the Big Ten. Could Penn State end up making a run? Could they make an argument? Can James Franklin finally get a big win and say
They should.
we deserve to be in? How will Michigan end up looking this year? First year under Sharon Moore. Can they bounce back after all these shenanigans that Michigan has went under since winning the national championship? Um, Things like that. And then if you want to go and really be crazy, you look at the ACC. Miami. Miami has a very, very talented team. We say that every year, but can they take advantage of that? Clemson. I think a lot of people sleep on Clemson. I know we talk a lot about Dabo and the decisions he's made these past 2 seasons, but not utilizing the transfer portal. But nonetheless, they are still talented, and I think Dabo is a good coach at points. And he definitely has experience in the postseason. Could they end up making it there? There's an argument. And then you go and look at the Big 12. I really think there's only a select few that you can pick from there. I think Arizona under Noah Fafita, I think they have a good shot to make it. I think Utah, obviously, with Cam Rising finally making his return. And then you think about some of the other teams in there. I don't know if they really had the firepower to really compete. And then maybe we talk about the Pac too.
No, there's no way. There's no
no,
way. No.
no
No
way at
way.
all. No way.
No.
No way. Washington State, Oregon State ends up making it.
If Washington State had Cam Ward, I'd say there's a possibility, but he's not there anymore. So no.
I don't know. Crazier things have happened. Yeah, but I think those are the obvious dark horse teams. I mean, it's really just about personal preference when you start picking them. And it's really going to come down to schedule, and a lot of different variables that are out of our control right now that we can't see, injuries, how teams will look, especially in week 1 and going into week 2. Hey, the first 3 weeks will really display how the season will go. I believe anyway. You'll play your I mean, some of these teams will play good teams, and we'll really have a depiction of how they will end up doing this season. But I mean, a lot of people don't think Alabama's a lock. I think Alabama will end up finding a way to get in there under Kalen DeBoer this first year. I mean, I think they really say talent set, and Alabama has the most talented team in the country. So Kalen DeBoer, who has done more with less, I think he will be coming into a really stellar situation. And then if you want to take a deep dive into Michigan, Alex, I know you're not huge on their situation right now.
Still
I
have
think
name a starting quarterback.
yeah, I think that will be out Georgie. I don't know why it wouldn't be. Sharon Moore has displayed some great coaching efforts, especially last season when he had to interim for Jim Harbaugh. He came out against Ohio State and took care of business. I don't think that goes unanswered. I think that was really a key part of him getting this head coaching job. And obviously the players believe in him. But they've lost a lot of key pieces, losing JJ McCarthy to the draft. You can go down and you lose Blake Corum. And you talk about the defense and how much they lost there. So can Michigan bounce back after all that has happened last season and make a run for the playoff? What do you think, Alex?
I don't see it happening. They just got handed their notice of allegations by the NCAA this past weekend. I don't think their offensive line was completely revamped over the offseason. I know they got some studs defensively, but they did lose a couple of guys. And the quarterback, I'm not sold on Alex Orji. I know he's really athletic. I just don't see this team being able to compete in this new landscape with how good teams are nowadays, with a new quarterback, new coaching staff. Realistically, you have a new DC and a new OC, and you have a new head coach. So I just don't see there being a route for Michigan to get there. I may if Alex Orji has a stellar season, he comes out of nowhere and surprises everybody, but I don't see that being in the cards for them going forward. And we might be sitting here and they might be bowl banned for a season, for all we know, with notice of allegations.
True. All right, I want to introduce a really, really crazy scenario. What if Florida ends up winning and gives, we'll say 10-2? Was this what? Georgia, they play Texas or something?
And they play Miami.
Yeah.
They play Florida State, Miami.
We'll say they lose to Georgia and LSU. I think those are two really. I mean, obviously, no one likes to lose, but you're talking about those are good losses. So
they play Texas, Ole Miss.
Yeah, so. or let's flip it. Let's say they lose to Texas and Georgia, but they beat everyone else on their schedule. Florida. Do you think that is a possibility at all? I know the roster is questionable.
I love Graham Mertz. He had a really good season for Florida, surprised a lot of people. But you lost Trevor Etienne to Georgia. Montreal Johnson is not a 3-down back in this league. There's just no way around that. They didn't bring in a whole lot to replace Trevor Etienne. Their defense isn't spectacular. Their defensive coordinator had a lot of issues last season, Dawson Armstrong. I know it was his first year as a DC, and maybe he can figure something out, but they didn't bring a whole lot in that impresses me. I don't think there's a route for them to go 10-2 or make the playoff, but I do think there's a route they can make a bowl game. I don't think Florida's going to be sitting here and be 3-9, 3-8 at the end of the season. I don't think there's a way they do that. I think Florida does surprise people, maybe gets a win over a Florida State, or maybe they upset Tennessee. I mean, crazier things have happened in the season, but I don't think Florida is going to be this team where you're going to see them be terrible, be the bottom of the SEC. They have a lot of talent. It's just they don't have enough talent to compete in all these competitive games that they're going to have to play against these top 25 teams, top 10 teams they have to go against.
Okay. And now we're gonna take a really, really deep dive. You thought that was a good one. Auburn. Is there a path for Auburn to make the playoff?
I saw this tweet the other day where it was talking about quarterbacks in year 2 at their new program in transfer portal, and they said Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, all these type of guys in the second year in the system had this huge jump. Peyton Thorne was listed. Can he make this jump? I don't think he can. Maybe he does because he's got better weapons. The offensive line is going to be better. The running backs, Jarquez Hunter, Jeremiah Cobb. I mean, if he can use these weapons effectively, and they're going to be clearance at the play calling thing, because I know Hugh Freeze and Philip Montgomery had some issues last season, and there was really uncertainty of who was calling the plays going into each game. That can have a lot to do with Peyton Thorne's struggles. He did have flashes last year. He played pretty good against Georgia. He played pretty good against Alabama outside of throwing a couple bad interceptions, one being at the end of the game, so I can't really blame him for that. But if Peyton Thorne can have a big growth, I don't think he's going to have a Joe Burrow or Jaden Daniels growth, but if he can have even half of that, and Auburn's defense can play better than it did last season, and they can get something out of some nose tackles that's really their weaker position, then maybe Auburn can go 9-3. Maybe maybe 10-2. I don't think that's a possibility. But if they could pick up a win against an Auburn or a Georgia or an Alabama, then I think that's a possibility. But I'm beating a dead horse here. It all rides on Peyton Thorne and his ability to command this offense. And what we saw last season, he showed flashes, but I'm not sold on him at starting quarterback at Auburn. But
Okay.
there is a route. There is a route for them to do that if Peyton Thorne can figure it out.
Yeah, I think there is a reason for Auburn fans to have hope. I think you see the roster and how talented it is, and you see Hugh Freeze and how he's recruited and how he's coached in the past. But then as an Auburn fan, you should also say, look what the past few years have been. Let's keep a realistic expectation for Hugh Freeze and don't end up going and firing him like they got rid of Gus Malzahn, who was actually able to beat Alabama. So I think that's a big thing. One more team to talk about. I don't think we've mentioned them at all, really. Notre Dame being an independent team. How does that play into making the college football playoff? Do they have enough key wins on their schedule to afford losing one or more games? Or is Notre Dame going to be out of luck when it's time to make a bid because they don't have a conference?
It's going to be Notre Dame's going to be dependent on who they lose to and how they lose to that team. They play A&M, Louisville, at Georgia Tech, Florida State, at USC, at Purdue, and they play Miami of Ohio, who is listed as a contender to maybe sneak into that group of 5 spot in the playoff. I don't really think that's a possibility for them.
No.
Their coach is a little bit of a got a screw loose, blaming Alabama for stealing his
Yeah.
kicker. But if they get blown out by one of those teams, like a Texas A&M, and Texas A&M does not do good in the SEC, and that's Notre Dame's one loss, and they're going against a 2-loss team like an Alabama somehow has 2 losses, and they're to the Georgia and they're to somebody else, then I would put Alabama over Notre Dame because Notre Dame's schedule isn't. It has good teams on it, but I don't think it's as good as somebody like Alabama. He might have 2 losses, or another team in the SEC like an Ole Miss, he might have 2 losses. So I don't think Notre Dame can afford to lose more than one game this season. And if they lose that one game pretty bad, it might be a big issue for them. I don't see Notre Dame making the playoff. If I was to make my list right now, Notre Dame would not be in my 12. There's I just see them losing to at least 2 or 3 teams. I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk schedule. A&M will give them fits. Louisville, I had them as a dark horse team to maybe make the playoff. If you go through Louisville's had the number 1 ranked recruiting class or portal class, you bring in Toledo running back Penny Boone. You bring in Colin Lacey, the South Alabama receiver, who was really good last season. Ja'Cory Brooks, we're really familiar with him, Nathan. So you also play Florida State. I mean, Florida State, they might figure it out at that point in the season. USC, what are they going to look like with Miller Moss at quarterback and a new DC? Will that be improved? They could give them fits. We all know Purdue in midseason can give any team fits. Ohio State knows too much about that. So Notre Dame, their schedule might look easy or somewhat easier on paper than a lot of teams, but I don't think their roster is sound enough to compete against a lot of these teams going forward. So I don't see Notre Dame getting into the playoff, but if they can handle business, then they will. I just see them losing 2 or 3 games.
All right, and I got one more question. So with Notre Dame not being in the conference, how many years do they think of missing the playoffs before they look at joining a conference to be able to get that automatic bid?
I think it depends on how they miss the playoffs. If it's where they have 1 loss and Alabama has 2 losses and Alabama's putting it over them, and that happens a couple of years in a row, not just saying Alabama's going to be 2 losses. Maybe it's a Big 12 team gets put in over them or something like that. And it happens, I think, 3 or more years. Then there's going to be a little bit of anxiousness to get into a conference because if you go to the Big 10, which is what the rumored to go to, and you're a 2-loss team going against another 2-loss team, you're going to have the benefit of the doubt there rather than your independent team playing a somewhat weaker schedule than a lot of these teams are playing. So I think 3 or more years of getting booted out of the playoff if they have 1 loss, they would move in. But if it's they have 3 losses, they have 2 losses, and they're going against another 2-loss team to get into the playoff, then I don't think there'll be a lot of issues there. It just depends on how they get snubbed out of the playoff. Kind of talk about my 12 teams. It's easy. Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, and Texas should be shoe-ins into this playoff. There should be no way they don't miss it. If they do, there's major issues at those programs. They have too much talent not to make the 12-team playoff. Miami, I had them picked to win the ACC. They have enough talent. Cam Ward, Damian Martinez at running back, bring in some good talent on both sides of the football. There really should be no reason Miami doesn't make this, but they have disappointed in the past, bringing in a lot of talent. But their quarterback has always been an issue, and Cam Ward should not be an issue at quarterback, especially what we saw at Incarnate Word and then Washington State. And then for the Big 12 conference champion, I have being Utah. Talked about it a couple weeks ago. Cam Rising should have a job, should be on LinkedIn right now looking for a job, but no, he's starting quarterback at Utah, and he's the oldest. I think he's one of, if not the oldest, starting quarterbacks in college football. And you bring it back majority of your defense. I think you lost one key starter. So Utah should handle business in the Big 12. That should be a no-brainer. But other teams from the Big, I think the Big 12 will be a 3-bid team in this 12-team format. I have Utah, I have Arizona making it in, and then I have Kansas or Kansas State. The winner of the Kansas State-Kansas game will get into the college football playoff. And I do think it would be Kansas getting that win. I look at their schedule. They don't play Utah or Arizona or Oklahoma State, while Kansas State plays Arizona and Oklahoma State. So Kansas has a somewhat weaker schedule in the Big 12. Now, that doesn't really benefit them if they drop a game to a lower tier team like a Colorado if they end up dropping a game there or something like that. So Kansas, I think, does get that spot over Kansas State, and that would make the Big 12 the 3-bid team I think they're going to be. But if Kansas State's quarterback Jalen Daniels can't stay healthy this season, as we've seen the past couple of years where he struggles with injuries, then my answer will change, because Jalen Daniels is the engine that makes the offense go. Because when he didn't play last season and the year before that, Jason Bean, not very good. Not very good quarterback. And the defense, which you've harped on in the past for Kansas, was much improved last season. They have one of the best secondaries in the Big 12. Kobe Bryant, we're familiar with him, Nathan, playing some college football. He's very talented. See him on the field. So I think the Big 12 does get the 3-bid team. The SEC, I have them getting 4, that being Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, and
Texas.
Texas, yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm not used to having Texas.
Yeah, I know, it's weird.
The one outlier that people might not have in theirs is Ole Miss. They should be at worst 10-2. Lane Kiffin, you've been there way too long to not make the college football playoff in a 12-team format. I know you lost Judkins, but Ulysses Bentley, running back, is primed to take over there. Jackson Dart, people have him being one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC and even in the country. So your offense should be perfectly fine. The weapons there, Trey Harris, Caden Prescorn at tight end. A lot of weapons there, even though you lost Judkins. The defense, Pete Golding, your defensive coordinator. So that might be an issue for you. If you're going against somebody running back wheel routes, might be a little bit of a problem. But the defense, you have a lot of studs. So this team and their schedule's a lot easier than most teams in the SEC, considering how difficult a lot of team schedules are. Florida, Alabama, Georgia. I mean, they have gauntlets. So they should be at worst 10-2. And those 2 losses would probably end up being to LSU and Georgia. The other tough game is Oklahoma, and I really don't think they should have issues with Oklahoma. So Ole Miss should make the playoff. Penn State, like I said earlier, should get into the playoff, should be at worst 10-2. Don't play Michigan. You play Ohio State at home, and that'll probably be a whiteout game.
Penn State, I actually think it's 11 a.m.
Oh, sorry. That's unfortunate for them.
Yeah, but kickoff.
But it will be a tough environment for Ohio State to play in. So Penn State, even if they lose that game, they still should be at least 10-2. They have one more mulligan, realistically. So by 12 would be Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, Texas, Oregon, Alabama, Ole Miss, Penn State, Arizona, and then Kansas. Or the winner of Kansas State, but I do have that being Kansas. Nathan, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but who do you have being that group of 5 team that makes the playoff? Has it changed since the last time we talked about it?
It's hard to say because I haven't seen them play yet, and until they start playing games, I really won't know. So I'm going to stick with either Memphis or Tulane sneaking in there. But I mean, there are a bunch of different capable teams of going out there and doing it. I think Boise State's one that doesn't get enough credit. I think they could slide in there. Other than that, I think it's going to be one of those things where it's very top heavy. The teams that are more talented, the teams that are able to bring in more of the top tier recruits are going to be obviously more favored. But it's going to be hard for these non-power five teams to really
Power
make a
four, power
case.
four.
Sorry, I'm so used to power five, power four. Sorry, Pac two. It's just going to be hard for them to really make a case to get into the playoff. It's and especially once you get there. I mean, that's only half the battle, because then you got to go and actually play against a power four team, whoever it is, and it's not going to be an easy game. I mean, the likelihood of them getting home field advantage is slim to none. Um, so it's one of those games where the team that makes it is going to have a certain level of adversity and hustle and talent and coaching, and it's all got to be like this perfect balance to go out and win. And I just don't know if that's possible with some of the teams I've mentioned. I think Memphis definitely has the best opportunity based on the amount of talent that team has. But Memphis has found a way to disappoint in the past, just like Miami has. I think Tulane here of recent has been more consistent group of five teams, so maybe they make it. And then Boise State, they've been consistent all the way around. They just don't really have the amount of talent as they did in the past. So it's going to be one of those three, in my opinion. I'll stick with Memphis for now, just based off talent. But any team that makes it from there is going to have a long road ahead.
I'm in the same boat. It's going to be Boise State, Memphis, or Tulane. Those are my top three, at least, that I think have contention. Boise State's big indicator is going to be when they play Oregon week 1. If they can show a little bit of fight, even if they do lose, I think that's going to show a lot of what Boise State can show potentially to get into the playoff. Going forward, Memphis, I picked them earlier show we did to get this bid, but I went back, looked at what they brought back defensively. None of they bring back their leading tackler, but their defense was not particularly good last season. It was among the worst in their conference. So is that defense going to be improved this season? I don't know. I look at Tulane. You lose your head coach, Willie Fritz, to Houston. You lose your starting quarterback, Michael Pratt. They still have not named a starting quarterback. They're between Oregon transfer Ty Thompson and their returning guy, Kai Horton. You bring in Troy head coach John Summerall, who we know is a good head coach. He did a lot for Troy, bringing that program back from what it was. You have running back Mekhi Hughes. Their defense led the AAC in scoring last season and returns a lot of starters. So I favor Tulane here, but I am worried about their starting quarterback position not having one named at this point, whereas Memphis and Boise State have. Boise State just named what's his name? Maddox Madsen as their quarterback, and then we know Memphis is going to be Seth Hennigan. So that's my big worry for Tulane, but it feels like that team is just way more complete than the other ones. So I favor Tulane here, but this is wide open. There's going to be a lot of teams. Tulane, another thing that worries me about Tulane is their non-conference, Kansas State and Oklahoma. I don't think they can afford to lose both those games. They're going to have to pick up an upset, at least in one of those. And I think they can. They have the talent to. So that worries me, but Tulane would be my pick to be my 12th team going forward and get that group of 5 bid.
Yeah, it's really just up in the air. And I mean, we'll see them play games. You mentioned Boise State playing Oregon week 1. That's going to be a real telltale sign of how these group of 5 teams can really compete against these top heavy teams, especially Oregon, who really can make an argument for being the best team in the country. They certainly have the talent to do so.
Do you think the SEC gets 4 teams or 4 more teams, Nathan, or are they at like 4 or less?
I'm going to go 4 or less just for this first 12-team playoff. I think they're going to be a little bit more cognizant of how many teams they put in from each conference, more so to keep a balance, and show that the 12-team playoff is more forgiving and fair to these other conferences. But in the future, I think it might be different, especially based off schedule and how much talent the SEC has. It's a very complete conference, especially if you look at top to bottom, even the worst teams, including Vanderbilt, really have talent on their team. No, I'm sorry, Vanderbilt like that. I'm sorry, they have Nate Johnson at quarterback. He's very good. But besides that, But the SEC definitely has talent top to bottom. I think he would get the Big Ten. Even with the amount of teams I brought in, I think they do have a lot of talent, but I still consider them to be very top heavy. A team like Northwestern going against a lower tier team from the SEC, I will pick the SEC team 9 times out of 10. And that's just how it is. So I think in the future we're looking at 4 or more, but right now I get 4 or less just because I think it will be more of a balanced situation. But I think there will definitely end up being cases this year for the SEC to say we should have had more teams in. And I think they'll go off of key wins really. I think just say a team like Missouri ends up going 10-2, but they're missing out on some key wins. I think they end up getting left out. And there are teams like that, but in the future, I think that could be a different story.
I had the ACC only getting Miami in, but is there a route for them to get more than one team into this playoff, Nathan? Maybe even three, or are they kind of meandering in that one, maybe two team
Yeah,
area?
I would cap them at 2. I would say, I mean, obviously one's guaranteed, with the conference winner. And I had that being FSU, but I think you can look at the talent of the ACC. It's we talk about top heavy with the Big Ten. ACC is very top heavy, and I think they're improving on that, but it's not where it really needs to be. I think Clemson can make a good argument if they pick up key wins during the season, and they sneak into the conference championship, and maybe they drop that game, but that's like their one or second loss. Then maybe they have a good argument to get in as that second team. But I think now it's just we can make these hypotheticals about how these teams' records will be, but then again, when you're comparing these at-large bids and saying this ACC team should be in over an SEC team or a Big Ten team, and then you compare their schedules, and the SEC team had to go through a complete gauntlet, and the Big Ten team had a really hard schedule as well, and then they have key wins, and then you go and look at a team from the ACC and just like it's lacking the meat of the resume, and I think that's a big problem for the ACC right now, because it hasn't been as good as previous years. We talked about Clemson getting Clemson, Alabama making national championship every single year basically, and now it's just like the ACC has kind of lacked that real just number that best team. And like what Florida State was the highest ranked ACC team. They just dropped it into a Georgia Tech team. And then the next highest would be Clemson. And
Yeah,
Clemson last year dropped their first game to Duke.
they play
So
Georgia this year for
yeah,
week one.
yeah. So it's a difficult thing to say the ACC should get more than one team in just based off of the other conferences. I mean, that's just where we are.
I don't think the ACC gets more than one team in. If they were to get a second team in, I would put Louisville in that slot. Touched on it a little bit earlier. Number one portal class, running back Penny Boone, very talented from Toledo. Bring in 2 talented receivers. Bring in Tyler Show at quarterback. If he can play better than Plummer did last season, it's already an upgrade. Plummer was terrible. We saw the ACC championship with that. So I would have Louisville sneaking in, being that second ACC team, but I just don't see it happening. They have a fairly difficult schedule at Notre Dame, play Miami, go to Clemson, go to Kentucky. They probably do drop 2 of those games, maybe even all 4 of them. But Louisville, I think, could sneak in if they play up to what they have talent wise. I don't think Clemson can get into this playoff. They're probably going to drop to Georgia. I don't think that's going to be as good as the game as people are expecting. Clemson has refused to use the transfer portal. Dabo has at least. And I don't think I think if they drop that game and there's just not enough meat and enough good games on their schedule to make it for losing to Georgia. They have to win their conference to make it. One last thing, Nathan, before we get out of here. Does the Big 12 get 3 teams like I'm predicting, or are they sort of like the ACC and meander in that 1 to 2 range?
I would include them closer to the ACC, and it gets back to having to fight for the at-large bids against these bigger conferences, against the SEC and the Big Ten. And guaranteed, I think that the Big 12 has a little bit of a better resume, especially this season. You look at the talent across the Big 12 with the new teams that they have added. I think you have a good case to make. But if I think a lot of these at-large teams, if they want to include more ACC teams or Big 12 teams, they can really only afford one loss, in my opinion, because they're going to have to be going against these SEC teams or these Big 10 teams that have 2 losses, but they've played gauntlets of schedules. And then you go and look at the schedules that these ACC teams and Big 12 teams have played, and it doesn't compare. So they can really only afford to drop one game in my eye. But it really just it's a comparison game at the end of the day. And I sound like a broken record because we're just repeating the same thing of where college football is going. But let's make this clear. It's the SEC and there's a gap, and then there's the Big Ten, and then there's a bigger gap, and then you have like a 1A, a 3A, 3B situation with the ACC and Big 12. That's my opinion. That's where we are in college football. And that's just how the playoff is going to be. People think it's going to give other teams more opportunities. No, it's to see more and more SEC and Big 10 teams actually compete in the playoff. That's what it is.
You'll definitely see in the future these Big 12 ACC teams try to schedule the toughest non-conference schedule possible. You'll see Clemson try to schedule Georgia's of the world every season because they have to get that on their schedule, because if they win that game, that's a big thing. Or if they lose that game, they can show, hey, we lost to Georgia by 3 points. We should get in over the 2-loss SEC team who maybe lost to Georgia by 15. So you will see these teams like in the ACC, the Big 12, the American, try to schedule these tough opponents so they can prove to the committee that they can compete against the big dogs in the NCAA. I think that's probably what we're moving forward to in the future. Mm-hmm. All right, that's all the time we have for today. We'll be back next week with Week 1 recaps for Alabama, Auburn, and all around the country. See y'all next time.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.